Hello, welcome to Jason the Old Millennial. My name is Jason, speaking to you here in my basement in the great state of Kansas. Today's video, we're going to talk about the year of 1968 and the music that came out that year. What were the best-selling albums? What were the award winners? And also, what were the major events that happened in the music industry? So I love to cover the year. We've been starting this ever since I did our top 10 albums from 1960 onward. Been covering each year in music, kind of covering what were the big stuff anyway. So yeah, we're covering 1968 here on Jason the Old Millennial. Hello everybody, hope everybody's doing well here on a Saturday evening. Been a pretty good day. I've been sitting and watching a lot of college basketball that's going on. Unfortunately, my team lost already. Pretty abysmal year for my KU Jayhawks, unfortunately. But still watching college basketball, March Madness, always a fun time for me. Yeah, so we were going to do our top 10 albums of 1968 yesterday, but unfortunately one of our members was not feeling well. Probably up all night partying is my guess, but anyway, so he's not feeling well, so we were not able to do that, but that's okay. I still need to do my, my recap of the year in music anyways. I haven't gotten around to yet. Hopefully we will be doing that soon as we can get together again and do our top 10 albums in 1968. Getting close to the end of the 60s. Yeah, so going through 1968, for me, it was actually a weak year of music comparatively to the last 3 years. Like 65, 66, 67, absolutely incredible year. Some of the best years of music I've heard so far. Of course, so far we've only covered 60 to 67, so we covered that like 8-year span. And obviously especially the first 3-4 years, really rough. Not a lot of great albums coming out. And then 65, man, the albums get so much better. Even 64 was pretty good. 64, there's some really good albums coming out that year. And then 65, man, just some of the best albums of all time. 66, 67. 68, for me, I don't know. When I was going through the albums this year, it just wasn't, I didn't hear as many great albums as I did the last 3 years. And I don't know if that's just because the 68 was a very psychedelic year. Obviously, talked about it last year, psychedelic music was getting really huge. Obviously, LSD is really huge at this point. A lot of psychedelic bands taking LSD. And I found myself listening to psychedelic music and realizing that I like psychedelic light music. I don't like heavy psychedelic music. There's definitely some bands that get out there and they're super psychedelic, which means to me they're super weird. They're super experimental, maybe too much experimental, too much, dealing with sound effects and weird, guitar effects and stuff like that take me out of the songs. And so I find myself not totally in love with psychedelic music as I thought I was, though there are some psychedelic albums and artists that I enjoy to extent. And like I said, I'm a huge Beatles fan, so I love when the Beatles do psychedelic music. But yeah, I don't know. I don't explain it. I just find myself going, I like some psychedelic music, but I'm not really heavy in psychedelic music, evidently, because I feel like that's a big problem with this year's. A lot of the big psychedelic albums I was not into, and some of those groups, like, for instance, The Doors are huge. I'm not a big Doors fan. I don't know. I'm not enjoying their music as much as other people, even though their music is very popular and does very well. But I'm not a big fan of like Cream, some of those more bluesy rock, of course, bands like that. I'm not a big fan of Jefferson Airplane. I thought their first albums, or not the first, their like second, whatever album, Surrealistic Pillow, I thought was a pretty decent album from last year. But man, the albums that come out after Surrealistic Pillow, they go on another level with psychedelic. Like Surrealistic Pillow was like a good psychedelic album, I thought. But then everything else after that I've heard is just the psychedelic music is just too out there for me. Anyway, so there's a lot of stuff like that out there. But anyways, for me, there's still a couple really, really great albums though. Like my top 5 I really enjoy when we get to that. My 10 through 6 actually were kind of like, they're decent albums, but they're not the strongest albums I've had in my top 10s comparatively. Obviously, you still got the British invasion bands are still going strong. The ones that are able to continue on with the psychedelic music, like the Beatles. I mean, you still got the Rolling Stones here, the Who, Well, who doesn't really have an album this year? It's next year they really come out with their big album. But Led Zeppelin hasn't come around yet. They're close to getting the other. We're getting close to Led Zeppelin, not quite there. You got Jimi Hendrix, of course, still coming out with some good music. The Simon Garfunkel as well. So we still got some really good stuff coming out here. But let's go through what are the top 10 best-selling albums of 1968. Number one, very surprising to me. I was not expecting this one, but it is Inagata Davida by Iron Butterfly. Yeah, Iron Butterfly. Not a band a lot of people talk about, I don't think. Obviously, I didn't realize this album was so popular. I'm kind of shocked. From all the big albums that are out this year, like this is the one that was number one. I don't know. I did listen to this album, I believe, but I don't remember it too much. It didn't make into my short list of great albums of the year. All I know is the In-A-Gadda-Vida, baby. That's like the big song on the album, I think. Besides that, I don't know much more about Iron Butterfly, but evidently that was a big song and that was a big album for them. So good for you, Iron Butterfly. You got the number one spot. Beating out the album that I figured would get number one, that is the Beatles' self-titled album, aka the White Album, was number two on here, which is interesting because it is a very out there album for the Beatles. It is their only double album, 30 songs. I mean, some double albums are like, I've seen double albums that are only like 16 songs long, or something like that. This is 30 songs. I mean, it is a huge double album for them. And I'm a big fan of this album, by the way. You'll probably see it on my top 10 list. Definitely their most experimental album. Maybe some psychedelic in there, but I mean, it's just all kinds of genres. They throw in every single genre they can think of into this album. And so you get just a variety of different styles that you don't hear the Beatles do. And a lot of it works, not all of it. Revolution 9, it's not really a song, it's just a weird avant-garde, thing that they put together. And there's some other stuff that's really terrible in that album, but there's some absolutely amazing stuff. Obviously, you got While My Guitar Gently Weeps and Blackbird, or some of the big stuff on there. But yeah, so the Beatles, though, still in here at number 2 on the list. Number 3, we got At Folsom Prison by Johnny Cash, which is his huge live album. This is definitely his biggest album, I would say, his most famous album, the one is best known for, which is interesting. It's a live album, not a studio album that I think we all know him for. And you kind of see this in the movie I Walk the Line. You kind of see a little bit of what it was like doing this album there. Actually, I haven't heard this album just because it's a live album, and I've been more. I know I need to listen to this album for sure, because I know it's very popular amongst the group. I know Nick really likes this, and I'm sure Scott and Jacob will like this as well, and I'm sure Briar does. I don't know if I've heard Briar talk about it, but I know Nick loves this album. It's one of his favorite albums, so it made, I know, onto his like 100 favorite albums list. But yeah, At Folsom Prison, of course, the title song At Folsom Prison, I know that. I'm guessing this is where they have the Boy Named Sue, which is that live version is definitely like that's the version to listen to for Johnny Cash, I think. I think I'd like this album. I didn't consider it on my list just because it's a live album. I don't want to put live albums on my list, but yeah, obviously a big album for him at number 3 At Folsom Prison. Number 4, we get the Hair soundtrack to the Broadway musical Hair, which was a huge musical at the time, and definitely very psychedelic kind of. Well, it's very hippie. It's about hippies. I mean, and it's called Hair because they had long hair, and deals with the Vietnam War, so it's dealing with all the 60s, social, political stuff. There's some good songs on there, like the title song Hair is really good. I know there's a sunshine, with that song at the very end, very iconic, really good stuff. It's not one of my favorite musicals. Personally, I'm not huge on it, except for some of the songs. And the movie, I'm not huge on either. The movie doesn't come out until the 70s, the Hair musical itself. So it'll be a little while till we get it on the big screen, but this is the big, of course, again, it seems like every year we still get these Broadway soundtracks or movie soundtracks that get into this top 10. So number 5 is another movie soundtrack. This is The Graduate soundtrack here at number 5 on the list, which was a big movie at the time, of course, starring Dustin Hoffman. I think Mike Nichols was the director, who won, I think, the Oscar for Best Director for the movie. And we got Simon Garfunkel doing a lot of the music here. So that's why it probably sold so well, of course, because you get some great Simon Garfunkel songs. I didn't listen to this album or this soundtrack, but I know it's pretty popular because of Simon Garfunkel. Also, you got Mrs. Robinson is the big number here. That was a huge song. It won Grammy Song of the Year for the year. One of the biggest 60 songs or big songs of 68. That's probably why it sold so well. I know Sounds of Silence was in the movie, so I'm sure that's on the soundtrack. And there might be a number of other ones, but I have to listen to it to really know. But again, yeah, big soundtrack from The Graduate. Number 6, we get Electric Ladyland by Jimi Hendrix Experience. So this is his third, I believe, and last album before he will, eventually will die here pretty soon. A drug overdose. For me, I think it's my second favorite album of his. It's another pretty solid album. You got All Along the Watchtower is the huge song, the Bob Dylan cover, but this is way more famous than Bob Dylan's version of the song. And it's just an amazing song. The dun 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 dun, that beginning part, and then that guitar coming in, and it's like, and then so it's great psychedelic music and some of the best guitar playing you ever hear. And Jimi Hendrix is amazing on it. That definitely probably made this a huge album because that's the huge hit on here. But also Crosstown Traffic was really great. You might have heard that one. And Voodoo Child, Slight Return is also really good on his album as well. So glad to hear it. Glad to see it did pretty well here in 68. It went at number 6. What's interesting is that number 7, it's a Jimi Hendrix greatest hits album, and it's called Smash Hits by Jimi Hendrix, which I didn't listen to this either. But I imagine it was crazy because I don't understand how he came out with a greatest hits kind of. I'm guessing it's like a greatest hits album. And his third album come out. I mean, he's only gotten to 3 albums so far in his career. So I don't know what's on this album. I'm kind of curious what would make his smash hits. Interesting enough, of course, he would, I'm sure he made some other music that would come out posthumously. But as far as albums go, this is the last album he's going to come out with before he passes away. So interesting that we get that already and not after he passes away. But anyway, but we get smash hits here with Jimi Hendrix, number 7. Number 8, we get Bookends by Simon Garfunkel. This is definitely one of their most famous ones. They're one of their biggest known albums. Kind of iconic, I would even say album cover and everything with the 2, I think, black and white on the cover. As, of course, again, I said, huge song, Mrs. Robinson's the big song on here. Also, America was a huge hit for them. Both top 10 Simon Garfunkel songs for me. Also, Hazy Shade of Winter is in here. That's kind of a little minor hit, I think, as well. That's all the big hits on here, but yeah, another huge album for them. A good year for Simon Garfunkel, I guess, doing The Graduate and Bookends both getting the top 10 best-selling albums of the year. Number 9, we get Cheap Thrills by Janis Joplin, and I don't know if I heard this one. I feel like I heard one of Janis Joplin's albums, and I'm just not a Janis Joplin fan. She obviously has a couple big hits. I don't know what's on this album. I don't remember exactly. She's definitely a acquired taste, I think. I don't know if this was. I know she was in a group, I guess, which I don't know much. I haven't done much research on Janis Joplin, but I know she was in a group first, and I don't know if they had anything huge, and then she went solo maybe at this time. And then I know she eventually has, Me and Bobby McGee, and I know there's another one out there, but Take a Little Bit of My Heart, whatever that song is. Anyways, of course, she also would pass away, I'm sure, soon after this. Also drug overdose. So yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things where I think her voice can be a little divisive. I'm not a huge fan of her voice, but I know she was popular. Obviously, she's well known for her voice and for her looks and everything. But yeah, so Cheap Thrills, it's not an album I'm familiar with, but it did very well, number 9 here. And then we close the top 10 with Frank Sinatra's Greatest Hits. So yeah, we get a Frank Sinatra Greatest Hits album. Every year I get a couple Greatest Hits into the top 10, which is it's not albums I'm going to cover because it's not that interesting to cover a Greatest Hits album. It's more interesting to do the studio album. So Frank Sinatra, obviously 68. I mean, he's been around for quite a while. He already won 3 Grammys this decade from and then those aren't even his most popular albums. I think he has even more popular albums in the 50s period before the Grammys even started. And so I'm sure he's been going on for 20, 30 years at this point already. So he's definitely one of the biggest singers of all time at this point. I mean, for a specific group, the crooner era. And I don't know if he's still making music. I think even in the 70s, he was still, you know, coming out with like, I Did It My Way. I think it was the number one hit. So he had I think he still has some good music coming up, but definitely getting towards, I would say, his older years already. And it's only 68, but again, I'm not familiar with this greatest hits. I'm sure it's pretty good. Wouldn't mind hearing it. I have like one kind of greatest hits album, but I'm sure he has a bunch more. Anyway, so that's the top 10 best-selling albums of 1968. Let's get to what won Grammy Album of the Year and not what was also nominated. Yeah, so the album that won Grammy Album of the Year is another strange choice to me, and that is By the Time I Get to Phoenix by Glenn Campbell. Won Album of the Year. Yeah, Glenn Campbell. Not someone you hear a lot about or has talked as much as some of the other groups and artists of this year. And he's probably just coming out of being in, of course, most of the 60s, he was in the Wrecking Crew, and he played, guitar on a lot of, like the Beach Boys, played guitar on a lot of Beach Boy albums. And even not too long before this, he was actually touring with the Beach Boys when Brian Wilson wasn't touring anymore. And he went on tour with them before he started going solo. But interesting how, he's a session guitar player. Now he's going solo. And wow, what success. Already Album of the Year. Because I don't know if this is his debut album, but I doubt he had that many albums at this point. Seems like kind of early in his career, but obviously rang a bell with people, or with the critics, or, the Grammys gave him the Album of the Year already. Again, this wasn't in the top 10 best-selling albums. I doubt it's not on my list, and I doubt it's going to be on the list of the other people in my group. I wouldn't think. And nothing against Glenn Campbell. I like Glenn Campbell for the most part. He's a little more country. I like the Wichita Lineman, and of course, By the Time You Get to Phoenix, pretty good. Gentle on My Mind's a great song. There's a couple number of good songs by him, but he's not one that I go to kind of artist. And all that. And I've heard this album, and there's maybe two good songs on the album, but I wasn't crazy about the album. To me, it was a weird choice for Grammy Album of the Year. Because we also get Bookends nominated for Grammy Album of the Year, which I would have much rather Bookends, probably, even though Bookends actually not one of my favorite Simon Garfunkel albums. It's actually my least favorite, but still a solid album. Would have made more choice this year. We also get Feliciano by Jose Feliciano, which I'm not familiar with that artist. A weird choice here for Album of the Year. It sounds Latino, maybe, like a Latin album, maybe. Number 4, we get Magical Mystery Tour by the Beatles, also nominated for Grammy Album of the Year. This obviously, this is weird because this album came out in 1967. Because if you saw my video in 1967, Magical Mystery Tour was my favorite album of 1967. So it's weird sometimes the Grammys do this where they take an album that came out a year before and then they put it in the year after. So that's a case where Magical Mystery Tour came out in 67, but it's nominated for Best Album for 68. Go figure, or whenever the Grammys came out. Obviously, I would vote for Magical Mystery Tour for Album of the Year if I could, because it was my favorite album, 67. Out of these choices, I would go for Magical Mystery Tour. The other album that got nominated was A Tramp Shining by Richard Harris. Yes, Richard Harris, Dumbledore himself. If you don't know, he was actually a singer in the 60s, which it was a shock to me too. In fact, my mom owns a vinyl album of his. I was at my parents' house, and I was looking at my mom's vinyl collection, and I saw she had Richard Harris. I'm Richard Harris? Richard Harris has an album? And it's like, yeah. He evidently was a singer before he was Dumbledore, which I know him for, and for, Gladiator and all these other movies. I know him mostly as an older actor, of course, but yeah, he had an album that was nominated for Grammy Album of the Year. I didn't check it out. That's another album I suppose I should have checked out, but I didn't get around to it. Again, I don't hear a lot of people talk about Richard Harris or his albums. It's not one of the, and when you're talking about 68, like I said, it's a year of psychedelic music, and yet you have Richard Harris and Feliciano here, Glenn Campbell. So it doesn't seem like the Grammys are really, I don't know, it feels like a weird choices for Album of the Year for the Grammys again. Bookends and Magical Mystery Tour, I guess, are fine. I mean, Magic Mist Tour, was great, but I mean, the White Album should have got nominated for Grammy of the Year and maybe won. Um, I would have rather that. Uh, I don't know, Beggar's Banquet came out this year. That would have been a good choice for Album of the Year, I think, from the Rolling Stones. It's very popular and very well liked. So I'm trying to think of what albums have stood the test of time that people talk about today, and I would say those would be bigger than by the time I get to Phoenix or Feliciano or the Richard Harris album. Definitely, I would put the White Album and Beggar's Banquet in here. Probably deserve to be in here more than those. Bookends is fine. That's actually a pretty good choice to get nominated, I think. Um, and without revealing too much of my list, I mean, it's interesting because you also get like the Kinks. Probably their most famous album is the Kinks present the Village Green Preservation Society, but yet it was not a well received album. So retrospectively, people probably put that in album of the year, but at the time it was not considered that great of an album. Also, the Zombies Odyssey and Urkel is very popular now, but it wasn't that popular back then. Interesting enough, and I'm trying to think. Is there anything else I'm missing from that year? Like I said, you got Electric Ladyland would have been a bad choice either. But yeah. Grammys again, kind of a miss for you, but better than giving it to Frank Sinatra or Barbra Streisand. At least you're giving it to somebody different. All right, now I'm going to finish by talking about what are some of the big events that happened in 1968. I don't really have a lot of big events that happened this year to talk about, but first we're going to start with February 18th. David Gilmour joins Pink Floyd, and Syd Barrett leaves due to mental health problems. This is early, very early. Pink Floyd, I've heard their first album. I haven't heard a lot of their albums. From what I've heard from the early albums, I'm not a big fan of they're definitely in that psychedelic era. Obviously, they get much bigger. I think it's 73 with Dark Side of the Moon, and that's what we mostly know in Pink Floyd. But they have a number of albums before Dark Side that are much different sounding. And of course, Syd Barrett was the lead singer to begin with, but he wasn't there very long, evidently, because even by 68, he has left the group because he's been having a lot of mental health issues. So unfortunately, he leaves. And we get David Gilmour, which is interesting because it's hard to think of Pink Floyd without David Gilmour. I mean, his guitar playing so iconic for the band. So big change there, getting Gilmour in, and will eventually lead to some of their biggest albums. So yeah, that happened here. February 27th, tragic news. Frankie Lyman is found dead in Harlem, New York at age 25 from a heroin overdose. If you know Frankie Lyman, he was in a 50s doo-wop group, I think called like Lyman, something in the teenage, was it Freddie and the Teenagers or something like that, I think was his group. He was kind of and he was only 15 years old when they were kind of a big thing in the 50s. They had one really huge song. I mean, they probably had some other ones, but the Why Do Fools Fall in Love was their huge hit. And it's a great song. I think it's one of my favorite from the 50s period. It's a great doo-wop. I love the doo-wop sound. Huge hit. He's 15. Just, obviously he's the lead singer, so his fame just skyrockets at such a young age to the point where the record company wanted to make him a solo artist and not be with the group that he was in. And I think he did a couple solo albums and neither one did well. And I think he was pretty much dropped after his solo career didn't go anywhere. The record company dropped him. I think he even got married at a very young age and might have even been married at this point. But he tried to make a comeback, if I remember right. He was trying to make a comeback around this time, but I don't think anything ever happened. And then he's dead of a heroin overdose. Obviously, he had huge drug problems. But it's crazy. He's only 25. I mean, 15 to 25. He was famous for he had a 10 years period of being famous. He was dead. I mean, it's just one of those tragic things that happen in the entertainment business, whether it's music or, Hollywood. People get in at a young age and it ruins their life. And gosh, it's just so sad when you see this kind of story and go, gosh, this kid, he's just so young, 25 years old. And at 25, he's already gone through his career, and his career is basically over at 25. And he's also having a lot of issues, drug issues, because you get into that kind of business. There's a lot of people that do drugs and, all kinds of stuff. And so it's another very tragic story, unfortunately. And in the music business. Every year we get one of these, and this is one of them. Some better news: March 1st, Johnny Cash, and was it June Carter? They get married in Franklin, Kentucky, and become um, Johnny and June Cash. Obviously, you see the story very well in the movie. Like I said, I Walk the Line music biopic, very good music biopic. Kind of shows this romance. That's the whole movie's kind of about the romance, and because they were both married and then they got divorced, and it was like one of those things where they kept coming back to each other, and then eventually they get married, and then they were married for the rest of their life until they both died, I think, within months of each other, back in maybe late '90s or something like that. Lived, in their 70s at least. Yeah, so yeah, this was if you've seen that movie, of course, you know about the story and kind of this somewhat great love story in some senses, where it feels like after they got married, Johnny Cash started to uh, get better because he had a lot of drug issues and drinking issues. And I think, and like I said, obviously having problems with his first wife and got divorced, and then here's his second wife, June, and they stayed married for the rest of their lives before they die. So it was kind of a good love story in that sense. But anyway, so that happened March 1st. June 20th, David Ruffin is fired from the Temptations. And again, I don't know enough about the Temptations to know much about this, but it seemed like a big enough deal. I put it on my list here. I believe he was the lead singer there, kind of the Temptations. And by 68, I mean, they had their big period of like My Girl and all these huge hits, and they still would go on without David Ruffin, I guess. I don't know what David Ruffin did after this. I didn't look it up, but I know Temptations keep going on, but this is kind of getting past their peak period, I would say, for Temptations, maybe. I say that, and I'm sure they have like a #1 hit coming up. So, but anyways, that happened. September 7th, the Yardbirds disband, and Jimmy Page forms the new Yardbirds. And this is huge because if you know the history of the Yardbirds, they're this kind of blues rock band. They started with I think Eric Clapton at guitar. Eric Clapton's not there very long, I think, and he quits because they weren't bluesy enough or something. They were too commercial sounding, so he quits. And I know at some point they get Jeff Beck at guitar, and then Jimmy Page at this time was a session musician, guitar player who played in Abbey Roads on a lot of different stuff. Like I know he played on the Goldfinger soundtrack for James Bond and all that anyway. So kind of interesting there. He also met John Paul Jones, I believe, who was also a session musician, and they kind of met there. And then he got into the Yardbirds, I believe, as a bass player. If I remember the history, is their bass player quit or something like that, and they need new bass players. So Jimmy Page came as a bass player, not a guitar player at first, but then he changed to guitar player, which good choice. I mean, Jimmy Page is one of the greatest guitar players I've ever seen. And so eventually got to playing guitar. I don't know if him and Beck were playing at the same time, but anyway, so that was the Yardbirds, and then they broke up at this point in '68. But Jimmy Page was trying to form what was left of it to kind of create a new band, and he, of course, got John Paul Jones on to play bass, John Bonham to play drums, and then eventually got also Robert Plant to be lead singer, and they call themselves the New Yardbirds. The only problem is the rest of the band, I think, sued them or kind of gave them a cease and desist letter, like you can't use the Yardbird name, because that's the name of the band that we were in. So the New Yardbirds didn't last very long before they had to get rid of that name, but we'll see next year they will form a new band, which will be one of the biggest bands of all time. And you see a poster right behind me of that band that will come about. Anyways, very interesting kind of history there. September 14th, we have some more kind of tragic news for Roy Orbison. Roy Orbison's two of his sons died in a house fire, but his oldest son does survive. And I believe it wasn't, I don't know, it was a year or two before this that his wife dies in a motorcycle accident. So I believe his wife died already, and now two of his sons died in a fire. So lots of tragic death in Roy Orbison's life. Very sad stuff happening there. And then lastly, on December 3rd, we get the 50-minute television special, the Elvis special called his comeback special. It is the highest rated special of the year. It's a big deal for Elvis. Of course, they were in '68. I mean, Elvis, was still doing a lot of, he was mostly known for his movies at this point. he was doing a lot more movies, and of course those would all be soundtracks that he would come out. And of course he was somewhat getting older. I was not old, but you know, the new stuff was the psychedelic stuff. Of course, we had the Beatles, the British Invasion, and all these more hard rock bands coming in. So Elvis Presley music is a little bit older by this point. Everybody's kind of grown out of that, and it's the newer stuff. But so this is kind of a cool comeback for him. I can't remember which one this is. I know he has a couple of famous specials. This is the one where he wears like the all blacks. I know there's one where he wears all black. I don't know if there's one where he wears the white jumper. I think he has a couple of specials, but this is one of his big ones. I think they even made it into an album that came out this year as well. Anyways, but yeah, so that was a big thing. Now I'll end with what new artists came out this year. We get Iron Butterfly, of course, which is interesting. Their debut album is the #1 album of the year. I mean, best-selling album of the year. So yeah, crazy. Iron Butterfly comes out. Steppenwolf comes out with their first album called Steppenwolf. Of course, they have the huge song "Born to Be Wild," which is an absolutely huge song for them. We also get Blood, Sweat, and Tears coming out this year with their debut album. Fleetwood Mac would come out with their debut album, and boy, did they have an interesting history as well. Joni Mitchell having her first album this year. Steve Miller Band, Randy Newman, who's famous for the Toy Story movies. Not a fan of his regular music, but he's also obviously made some iconic music for Pixar. We get the band coming out with their debut album is music from the Big Pink, something like that. They were Bob Dylan's like backing band for some of his albums, and now they formed their kind of gone from being their backing band to being having a really good career as a band themselves, which is weird. They're called the band. So we also get Creedence Clearwater Revival, a huge band. One that we covered a lot on. I've done a deep dive on them, and we've covered a lot of my friends' channels. It's definitely a group that we've covered quite a bit. And I've listened to a lot of their music. And I really like CCR's Clarence Clearwater Revival and their debut album, which is the name of their self-titled album. We get Three Dog Night. Three Dog Night would have a lot of big hits coming up. Anyways, we get Jethro Tull. Jethro Tull. I wasn't a big fan of the first couple albums, but once we get to Aqualung, I think we'll start talking about that album a lot more. And we get James Taylor, which is signed on by the Beatles, their company, the Apple company that they formed, and they started signing on artists and helping produce albums for new artists. And one of the new artists is James Taylor, which would be their most famous client, I guess they had basically. And he would come out with his debut album as well, and obviously have an incredible career. So those are the new artists coming out this year, and that's the year 1968. Feel free to talk about anything I mentioned. Maybe I missed something, a band or an album or an event that I should have talked about. Definitely put it in the comments. I love to read what anybody thinks. Besides that, tell me what you think about 1968 and your favorite albums. Love to read into that. Hopefully soon we'll come out with our top 10 favorite albums of 1968 and have a really fun discussion on that. Besides that, thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you for liking it. Thank you to all my subscribers for supporting the channel. I appreciate all of you and hope you have a good day.